My name is Rosalyn, and I am a counseling intern at Lighthouse. My introduction to biblical counseling occurred when I started attending Lighthouse 7 years ago. At that time, I had just graduated from college and was beginning my career as a high school math and science teacher under the program Teach for America, an AmeriCorps organization with the mission of confronting educational inequality. I was ignorant to the realities of being a teacher and naively thought that I would go into the classroom, unconditionally love my students, and change their lives through education. But in actuality, I was ridiculously underprepared to be an effective teacher, and my students quickly realized that they could completely overrun my classroom. Within the first week, I was having nightmares about teaching at night and waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning to lesson plan for the next day. And there was this constant dread of facing my students, knowing that I wouldn't be able to control them. And as I felt more and more overwhelmed with shame and anxiety, I began to struggle with outbursts of anger in the classroom whenever I felt out of control. I felt like intimidating my students by being angrier or being louder than them was the only way to manage my classroom. But my anger only fueled a deeper sense of being a failure because I knew that how I was responding was wrong. So it was in the midst of this trial and being at a loss of what to do that I applied to receive biblical counseling. Biblical counseling was not what I expected it to be. In some ways, it felt more simplistic than I had imagined. Each week, I would meet up with my counselor, share what was going on with my life, and she would encourage me with biblical truth and assign me work to grow my faith, whether that be reading specific passages that were relevant to my struggle or to answer questions through journaling to help me process my thoughts. And in other ways, counseling was also much more profound than I had imagined. I thought that we would be focused on practical help, like learning strategies for anger management or growing my ability to be Zen-like and carefree in all circumstances. Instead, counseling forced me to see my heart more clearly. I began to learn that at the root of my sin was a worship problem. I was idolizing comfort and control over God. I realized that I was using my success as a teacher to measure my worth. Counseling helped expose the inconsistencies that existed between the realities of the gospel and the way that I was living my life. As I dug deeper into the Word, my understanding of the beauty of Christ and the depth of His love for me increased. I began to change how I viewed myself and the difficult circumstances around me. One passage of scripture that God used during counseling to comfort me was 2 Corinthians 12:9, which says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." When I was a teacher, I wanted to be able to boast in my competence as an educator and my care for my students. I wanted to be able to take credit for changing my students' lives. Whenever I felt short of the impossible standards I had set for myself, I would spiral into self-hate and condemnation. I viewed my weakness as evidence of my unacceptability, and I feared rejection from God and others. 2 Corinthians 12:9 exposed the lie that I had anything within myself to boast of. Rather, I needed to see the utter depravity of my heart in order to truly understand that my salvation and my sanctification were gifts of God's grace. God knew that what would bring me the greatest joy was to break down my pride and to increase my thankfulness for what Christ had done for me. In the past, exposure of my human limitations and my sinful nature would lead to feelings of shame. Even when I had confessed my sin and repented, I still felt the need to isolate from others and mentally beat myself up for days. I would replay my transgressions over and over again in my head and despair over the apparent lack of growth in my life. After receiving counseling, I realized that if I truly believed in the free gift of salvation, I did not need to take punishment into my own hands. Rather, what glorified God the most was to live in the reality of His total forgiveness and to respond by grace-given obedience. Though I still very much struggle with shame, I also have so much more peace now when I do stumble. Rather than looking at myself and feeling the need to do better next time, my hope comes from the reality that my sanctification is promised by God, and God is always faithful to His promises. So if He says that the work He started in me will be brought to completion, I can be fully confident that He and not I will make it happen. First, there is no shame in asking for help. Rather, the ability to ask for help demonstrates a humble understanding that we are not meant to walk this Christian life alone. Receiving counseling is just one more way to invite community into our lives. Secondly, counseling is most effective when it is viewed as just one part of the larger church body. Counseling is great because you get consistent and targeted time to work through specific issues, something that might not happen as regularly in day-to-day conversations. But counseling is also only meant to happen for a season. As we increase in our knowledge of God and ourselves, the application of our faith occurs mostly in the context of relationships with others. So the healthiest way to approach counseling is to see that it is simply just one pathway of grace into our lives, in addition to things like Sunday service, small groups, accountability, and informal conversations. Lastly, the catalyst for asking for biblical counseling is often suffering. Something is hard and what you are doing feels like it's not working. I know that's why I applied for counseling. But if the goal of receiving counseling is to make life easier, you might end up feeling disappointed. Life is going to continue to be hard because we are sinners living in a broken world. But if we understand that the goal of biblical counseling is that we get the privilege of knowing, loving, and becoming more like Christ each and every day, what results is deeper faith, hope, and love.